So I will begin this presentation shortly with 2 slides of quotes by Associate Professor David Hastie of Alpha Crucis University College, the National Training University College of the Australian Christian Churches, from 2 opinion pieces published by the ABC's Religion and Ethics. Firstly, during the recent review of the Australian curriculum in May 2021, and secondly, after the revised Australian curriculum version 9 was released to the public in April 2022. I'm about to do so in order to present evidence, and here I draw on Ghassan Haj, that the myth of a white Christian Australia still dominates the Australian curriculum, eclipsing Australia's multi-faith reality. This reality, and here I draw on Regina Gantner, is triangulated and includes First Nations, Asian, and European worldviews that are spiritual, religious, and non-religious, and obviously people who have those worldviews as well. So as Gary Baumer, Greg Barton, and I have recently argued, this diverse worldview reality in Australia also intersects with many other diversities, including those of gender, sexuality, and multi-species diversities. So my approach here is one of critical theory and critical discourse analysis. Given what I am exploring here are power dynamics, issues of equality and inequality, inclusion and exclusion, freedom and harms. I do so that we as a society can hopefully move toward truly respecting and valuing the worldview diversity and reality of this country, including First Nations knowledges, Christian and many faith and non-faith traditions and expressions, while preventing or at least minimizing harms to all. I will explore all of this in more detail now, beginning with Hastie's quotes, printed by our so-called fair and balanced ABC. So this is the first article. So Hastie wrote in May 2021, after the draft curriculum had been released by the Australian Curriculum and Reporting Authority, henceforth known as AASR, the month before. So he wrote that AASR was not surprised that responders were accusing them of dumbing down, being too woke, not being woke enough, and needing to be immediately abolished as an organisation. He explained that it was, quote, the huge volume of the Indigenous content and foci that have drawn particular criticism. He then stated that as a Christian, and given Christ's stress on giving a voice to the voiceless, I both applaud and support the increase of First Nations history in the consultation curriculum, but added that, to put it simply, the inclusion of one topic always means excluding something else. This process of selection and exclusion in education has the real effect of valorizing one voice and silencing another. He argued that Christianity is one of the very significant histories that is conspicuously silenced, and called on readers to have their say and to rectify this perceived imbalance through participating in the AASR consultation process. Second article. So almost a year later, on the 12th of May, 2022, Hastie, in another ABC piece, boasted that he had contributed directly as a consultant to AASR on the final stages of the new Australian History and Civics curriculum, as AASR responded promptly to the criticisms, including by the then Conservative Liberal Federal Education Minister Alan Tudge, of a, quote, unhistorical lack of reference to Australia's Christian heritage and of attempts at woke engineering in our classrooms by bringing in an additional tier of experts, consultants who joined the existing panels to work on the next draft. Hastie touted his success, that the final version states it will include, among other things, a focus on Australia's Western and Christian heritage, with many additional references to both throughout the Foundation to Year 6 History and Social Sciences HAS curriculum, where First Nations content has been reduced by about a third. He then added that the new material related to Christianity in the 7 to 10 history curriculum is far more substantial, and that there are also explicit references to Australia's Christian heritage and culture, particularly in Year 7 civics and citizenship. He observed that as a symbolic document in an ostensibly secular but still quite religiously pluralistic country, a national history curriculum needs to accurately represent the religious past, and that version 9 of the Australian curriculum is a decent attempt to rebalance the account and a genuine attempt to move towards the reasonable centre. So I will now briefly expand upon why this is so problematic, particularly as the new Australian curriculum does not actually adequately reflect the historical facts or the contemporary worldview, diversity and reality of young Australians. I will draw here on Australian census data and the findings of 2 Australian Research Council funded studies that my colleagues and I have conducted on Australia's Generation Z and also on representations of diverse worldviews in the Australian curriculum. So Australia has always been a culturally and religiously diverse country, evident in First Nations knowledge systems, languages and beliefs, and subsequent flows of trade and migration to and from Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world. First Nations peoples have long and deep ties with Makassar Muslims of what we now call Indonesia. And at the end of the 19th century, large communities of Chinese and Japanese workers and migrants who practiced Taoism, Confucianism, and/or Buddhism engaged in mining, pearling, and sugarcane industries, and outnumbering Europeans across the far north of Australia. And it's actually fears regarding their numbers and presence and their economic strength, which led to the introduction of the 1901 Immigration Restriction Act, known as the White Australia Policy. So a myth of a white Christian Australia was thereby socially constructed at Federation through the introduction of this racist act, again, drawing here on Hart, and perpetuated through much of the 20th century until the institutionalization of policies of multiculturalism in the 1980s. 40 years on, in the 2020s, Australia is still caught in contestation around these 2 competing versions of its national identity, the white Christian fantasy versus the multicultural and multi-faith real Australia. And this battle has also long been played out in relation to the place of religion in schools. So prior to 2008, when a national curriculum began to be developed in Australia, each Australian state was responsible for developing its own curriculum. Victoria, New South Wales, and Western Australia still adapt the Australian curriculum to their own context, while the other states and territories teach the Oz curriculum as is. Australia's earliest government schools established in the mid-1800s included some teaching of Christianity, yet by the turn of the 20th century in most states, although not Queensland, they moved to free, compulsory and secular education, despite vehement protest from Christian organisations. Or sorry, I might have got that a bit wrong. I think Queensland did move secular, but then something changed again. We have Queenslanders here who can verify that. Most of my research has actually been focused on Victoria. But basically, the majority of Australian states switched to secular education. So as a result, Australian government schools have never had dedicated religious education subjects or substantive content on religion in their prescribed curricula. And by contrast, many state education systems in, say, the UK, the EU and Nordic countries, which initially had Christian religious education in their schools, shifted to a world religions model of education in the late 20th century as a result of changes in religious demographics and advocacy by major interfaith organisations. So many faith-based schools in Australia have also taught a world religions, general religious education since that time. And these programs have increasingly included content on ethics and or non-religious worldviews, and are therefore more accurately described now as worldviews education. So the Australian curriculum was conceived during the Conservative Liberal Prime Minister John Howard's years as part of his nation-building agenda. Following the events of September 11, 2001, and particularly the July 7 London and Bali bombings in 2005, Australia's culture wars focused on Australian Judeo-Christian values and a narrow nationalism harking back to the white Australia years. This turn away from multiculturalism was highly problematic, as it was accompanied by Islamophobic and migrantophobic discourses that exacerbated an underlying racism in Australia. It also fueled the far right's rise and undermined the very social harmony that these values education programs were designed to engineer. Given that these discourses about adhering to Judeo-Christian values excluded and potentially alienated non-white, non-Christian Australians, and thereby increased the risk of harms of racism and religious discrimination against them. Labor Prime Minister Kevin Rudd was elected in 2007, and the Melbourne Declaration on Educational Goals for Young Australians published in 2008. And this shaped the drafting of the Australian curriculum. It included a much more inclusive approach to intercultural and interreligious understanding and social cohesion than the Howard government's Australian values rhetoric. The Melbourne Declaration highlighted the then government's commitment to ensure that schooling contributes to a socially cohesive society that respects and appreciates cultural, social, and religious diversity. Yet the subsequent draft of the first National Australian Curriculum, sorry, my light goes off. Sorry, did not include general religious education or worldviews education as one of its key learning areas or as one of its general capabilities. Instead, ACARA decided to position the main content on contemporary religion in Australia in civics and citizenship, which reflected the prevalent and problematic securitization of religion in policy and scholarship in a post-9/11 and post-7/7 world. The religion in schools debate became the focus of scholarship in Australia during this time, examining in particular what Cathy Byrne declared as its Christian privilege, and also issues of state accountability. Myself, Gary Baumer, Cathy, Marion Maddox, we've all documented the history of this debate in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, and have also drawn on scholarship from the United Kingdom, Europe and Canada regarding similar debates and best practices. And such studies have been a hot topic in analysing how well, and in many cases how badly, states have been adjusting to the changing worldview composition of their societies and enacting processes of decolonisation and anti-racism within them. So a review of the Australian curriculum was undertaken in 2014 following the election of Conservative Catholic Prime Minister Tony Abbott. It was conducted by Professor Kenneth Wiltshire and Dr. Kevin Donnelly, and their capacity to do so was widely questioned, and particularly given that Donnelly is known as, and I quote here from his own website, as, quote, one of Australia's leading conservative public intellectuals and culture warriors. So briefly, the 2014 review concluded with a list of recommendations, including recommendation 15, which made no mention of religious diversity and instead stressed the need to better recognise the contribution of Western civilization, our Judeo-Christian heritage, and the democratic underpinning of the British system of government to Australia's development. More recently, the 2019 Mpatwe Alice Springs Education Declaration, which shaped the current version 9 of the Australian curriculum, similarly to the 2008 Melbourne Declaration, foregrounds the importance of social cohesion, including respecting religious diversity, yet there is still no dedicated learning area or general capability in the most recent draft of the curriculum focused on religion or diverse worldviews. And so instead, worldview content is again included across the curriculum. So the findings of the Australian Research Council funded study investigating the worldviews of Australia's Generation Z also began to be released around this time in 2019. And here you can see our research team and some details of this. And Ruth Fitzpatrick was a research fellow on this and also the other study that I'm talking about today. So our research methods and questions were informed by international research on religious diversity and education arising from the Religion and Society Research Program in the UK and Europe. And our study comprised 3 stages, 11 focus groups with a total of 94 students in years 9 and 10, a nationally representative random digit dial telephone survey of 1,200 young people aged 13 to 18 and 30 in-depth follow-up interviews with survey participants. So now you can see this is the religious composition of young Australians of Generation Z. 52% say they're non-religion, 19% Catholic, 8% other, 6% Anglican, 4% mainline Protestant, 2% Pentecostal, 3% Muslim, 2% Buddhist, 2% other, 1% Hindu, 2% no response. But of course, it's actually far more complex than that, especially pertaining to the no religion affiliation. So we, and very much led by Andrew Singleton here, our quant guru, we used a latent class analysis to identify 6 statistically distinct worldview types of Australia's Generation Z. So 23% are this worldly, like completely non-religious, some even anti-religious within that group. 15% are indifferent, 18% are spiritual but not religious, 8% religious and spiritual, 20% nominally religious, and 17% religiously committed. And indeed, the strong identification with spirituality among Gen Z Australians is a really significant finding and was an unexpected finding for us of this study. So the study also revealed a moderate level, and that was quite generous, I think, when we called it moderate, level of religious literacy among the AGZ focus group participants. And while it was broad, it was certainly relatively shallow. And this is really not surprising, given that our study also found that 41% of this cohort had no lessons or information on religion at all. And they were largely sourcing their information on religion from family, peers, and media. And while most Australian teens, 93%, think that having people of many different faiths makes Australia a better place to live, disturbingly, 20% of them had neutral or negative views about religious minorities. But of particular importance here is that our study also revealed that students who had received general religious education, largely in Catholic or faith-based schools, have more positive views of religious diversity in Australia. By contrast, students who have no GRE are somewhat more likely than those who have GRE to hold negative or neutral views towards religious minorities. And that's even when controlling for factors of age, gender, school type, socioeconomic status, and religious identity. So building on the findings of previous studies on religious diversity and education in Oz, the Religious Diversity in Australia ARC that I'm part of, and here's the team. And Ruth Fitzpatrick and I have been working closely on this data collection and analysis. So I must thank her for this part of the paper specifically. So we employed a mixed quantitative and qualitative critical discourse analysis to the content of the 2015 elements of the draft consultation 2020 to 2021 draft of the curriculum, and also the final just released 2022 Australian curriculum. And we coded the data using a tool called AntConc, a data analysis tool, which was actually employed by and recommended to us by Eleni Poulos. And she used this in her analysis of religious freedom debates in Australian media. And then we have undertaken a qualitative critical discourse analysis of this data, investigating the positioning and representation of diverse worldviews across these curricula. And a more detailed reporting on this data will be included in a forthcoming academic article and book chapter arising from the study. And so now I'm just really going to present a bit of a snapshot, because obviously we don't have much time today. All right, so the coding and the discourse analysis here reveals unequal attention to religion, spirituality, and also diverse religions here in the curriculum. So the religion, religio was the term we searched for, appears most often in history and civics and citizenship. And if you compare it with the 2015 to 2022 curriculum, there's not very much difference, but there is a little bit more in history, mentions of religio in the recent draft. So in the 2015 HAS subjects, there was more emphasis on diverse religions in ancient history and in other places than there was on the history of religious diversity in Australia. The 2015 and 2022 Year 7 history covers the religions of the ancient world, quote, including Egypt, Greece, Rome, and the religions of India and China. 2015 and 2022 Year 8 history examines Viking religion and also the global spread of Christianity and Islam. 2015 Year 6 geography asks students to compare the religious traditions of Australia with those in Asia and, quote, other parts of the world. 2015 Year 5 history investigates the role of religious leaders in the shaping of the Australian colony in the 1800s. However, other than this one point in 2015 Year 5 history, there was no mention of the long history of religious diversity in Australia, and particularly pre-1901. Thankfully, the 2022 history and geography content does have significantly more mentions of the changing religious practices, activities, symbols, groups, beliefs, tolerance, stereotypes, and the significance of religious places in Australia in Year 1 to 6. And it's mentioned kind of as religion general. It's not really with mention of specific groups, but it's still certainly a welcome inclusion. And there's also a new mention of colonial religion in 2022 Year 4 history as well. Contemporary religious diversity, religious issues and practices in the 2015 curriculum was really largely focused in civics and citizenship. And there are sections in the 2022 also, a lot of the content is still in civics and citizenship. And both in 2015 and 2022, there are mentions very early on in foundation and Year 3 history on religious festivals and holidays. And I'll give you some examples of these in a moment. And all of this does actually celebrate quite well the rich religious diversity of contemporary Australia. But again, as I say, in a very sort of general way. Okay. All right. And when we look at the placement of spirituality, again, it's sort of quite similar in both the 2015 and 2022 curricula, but the 2022 curricula has more content on spirituality in geography. And here that the mentions of spirituality are most often in reference to First Nations people in geography, history, and economics and business. So for example, 2015 and 2022 Year 2 and 3 history explore the relationship between language, country, place, and spirituality of First Nations. And in Year 5, Economics and Business, explores First Nations Australians' spiritual connections to the land, sea, sky, and waterways. There are sort of more general references also to spirituality in Year 2 History in the most recent draft of the curriculum, the spiritual significance, say, of persons, places, and buildings in their local community, and how people's relationship to the environment can have a spiritual dimension and can influence where to live, and also impact about ideas around environmental change. Okay, so this table that you're looking at now is really the thing that I'm mostly focused on next. And then we'll look at some actual quotes to illustrate this argument before wrapping up. So as you can see from this data, it's very clear that there are more references to Christianity than to the other religions across the curriculum. This is a table actually specifically on the HASS subjects, which is mainly where this content on religion in Australia is featured. There are a lot of references in languages, but they're again mainly to other diverse cultures elsewhere. So looking into this, the other really significant thing to note is that really it's just an increase in Christianity in the new draft of the Australian curriculum. So while the Australian curriculum 2020 has more content on religion, as I said before, and religious diversity more broadly, using that code religio, in terms of the actual sort of treatment of the diverse groups, it's really only Christianity that's been increased quite dramatically, especially the content in history, which basically reflects what David Hastie said in his speech. Now, I don't have time to list all of those examples, but let's just dig a little bit deeper into some of these issues. So, as I said before, most of this content is in history or in civics and citizenship, and it is of great interest to us to note the positioning of the different religions here, as well as the amount of mentions and the content of the mentions in our analysis. So looking at this foundation history and then also Year 3 history. The 2015 and 2022 foundation history mentions of diverse religious festivals list them in the following order: Christian, Islamic, Muslim, Buddhist, and Jewish festivals. And the 2022 version adds a new mention of the Coming of the Light, a festival to mark the introduction of Christianity in the Torres Strait Islands. So once again, you can see very clearly that primacy is given here to Christianity and also to Islam, and Hinduism is not included here at all. Now, in Year 3 history, this includes a list of diverse religious celebrations, once again beginning with a Christian celebration and then a Hindu, another Christian, a Jewish, a Buddhist, and then an Islamic festival. The 2022 version changes this order around to have 2 Christian festivals first, then followed by Buddhist, Hindu, and Muslim festivals. And the Jewish festival is this time excluded completely. So again, Christianity is privileged here, and this privilege has been strengthened actually in the 2022 version. And the order of the religions in both the 2015 and 2022 versions do not align either with the historical presence of diverse religions in Australia or with their current percentages of religious affiliation. So once again, it's quite haphazard and random, other than the Christian privilege, which is clear. Now looking just a bit at civics and citizenship, really the key content is in 2 places. It's here in Year 7, and then it's again in kind of Year 7 and Year 8, depending on which curriculum. So you can see here, and as mentioned previously, a significant difference in the description of Australia's worldview composition occurred after the Wiltshire and Donnelly review of the Australian curriculum, where in the first draft, in the 2010 draft, and I think it was us that gave them that language, Australia was just simply described as a secular and a multi-faith society. After the 2014 review, you can see that it's a secular nation, a multi-faith society, but also as having a Christian heritage. The revised Australian curriculum, which was circulated for comments during the AASR's 2020-2021 consultation, chose instead to emphasise cultural diversity and then descriptors of multi-faith, secular and plural before they removed the emphasis on the Christian heritage. So this is clearly the thing that really made people irate, like people such as Hastie, and replacing it with First Nations Australians. So the newly revised, and it's been released, 2022 Australian curriculum chose instead, and I would say highly problematically again, to retain those descriptors of secular and multi-faith. It added about the pluralist society draws upon diverse cultural origins, but here it purposefully lists and prioritises Christian and Western heritage ahead of First Nations histories and cultures, and also ahead of migrant communities. So while the inclusion here of First Nations cultures obviously is long overdue and a good one, I mean, we really think that, or I certainly think that AASR should have prioritised them, included them ahead of any mention of Christian or other migrant communities, and arguably before the descriptors even of being a secular or multi-faith society. And again, here there's no mention actually of the other religious groups. They're simply sort of put under cultural migrant communities. So it's, again, only Christianity that gets highlighted as a religion within this multi-faith society. So final table. So this descriptor here across all three curricula focuses on how values can contribute to social cohesion in Australia. And here you can see that the 2015 Australian curriculum elaborations focus on how Christian traditions have influenced Australian society, democracy and law, and on identifying the values and beliefs of religions practiced in contemporary Australia, for example, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, and Hinduism. So once again, privileging both Christianity and Judaism here, and signalling the problematic perceived alignment of Australia's values with Judeo-Christian values that I've discussed previously. The 2020 to 2021 Australian Curriculum Consultation Draft and the final 2022 version both include virtually the same elaborations on religious values and beliefs, which once again privilege Christianity over and above other religions in Australia. And this section now includes an addition on the impacts that Christian traditions, values, and their influence on society, democracy and law has had upon First Nations communities and other groups, literally the word other groups in Australian society. So once again, First Nations, Australians and Jews, Muslim, Buddhists and Hindus are other minorities groups, are positioned below, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists and Hindus as the others are positioned below Christians, and Christians are seen thereby to wield the power and sway over all of these groups, obviously highly problematic. So the order of the religions listed here, as with the early history content, also does not at all adequately reflect either the historical or demographic facts of Australia's religious composition. And if they were to do so, I would argue that they be listed according to the latter, the demographic facts. So to be listed as Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Judaism in order of the percentage of these communities currently in Australia. So just to conclude, the recent review of the Australian curriculum provided an opportunity for a more systemic and comprehensive treatment of diverse worldviews across the curriculum and to address notable omissions and power imbalances within it. AASR also had the chance to revise its content content to more accurately reflect the worldview diversity of young Australians, including First Nations, spiritual, religious and non-religious worldviews, based on the findings of the ARC-funded AGZ study, and they were well aware of this data. So this could have assisted in increasing religious and worldview literacy and parity in Australia and reducing negative perceptions of religious minorities and thereby religious harms against other minorities as well, with a greater critical religious literacy. So while there's certainly been a much needed increase of content on First Nations cultures, including on First Nations spirituality throughout the curriculum, and on the religious diversity of Australia in years F to 6, which again, as I say, is really welcome, and clearly some of the recommendations that we and others made on how important it was to do this have been heeded by ACARA. But the 2022 Australian curriculum also, and problematically, and it would seem something that happened in the final stages of it all, reflects a strengthening actually of Christian privileging rather than a dismantling of it. So this all offers further rather depressing evidence that I and Byrne and Maddox have all argued previously, that the pressure of conservative Christian lobby groups and the views of conservative Christian political leaders continue to outweigh the robust empirical data, findings and recommendations of major Australian and international studies regarding the need for and benefits of a more equitable and critical diverse worldviews education in secular government schools. And thus, really, it's contravening secular principles. And so we now have to wait until the next major curriculum review to address these issues at the national level. However, not all hope is lost. There's still a chance for Victoria, New South Wales and Western Australia to rectify this, as they are all still in the process of revising their state curricula in response to the 2022 Australian Curriculum version 9, and to instead be guided by the complex, critical and caring worldview, reality and voices of young Australians who are non-religious, spiritual and religious, as documented in the Gen Z study. And I'm putting in a plug for our book there as well. Thanks, everyone.